We will begin the webinar shortly. All right, we have a few more guests that are joining the conversation, but we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sharon Roberson, and welcome to the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee Stand Against Injustice webinar. Today, we have an exciting topic, and we have a wonderful panel. Our topic is today, Redefining Leadership, Women of Color at the Forefront of Change. Now, those of you who are part of the YW family, and for those of you that may be becoming introduced to the YW today. Our mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. As we look at the end of a Women's History Month, we think it's very important to highlight women who are making a change for the better for our community. I want to extend our deepest gratitude to our sponsors whose generous support makes this series possible. The Nissan Foundation, the Harnisch Foundation, AllianceBernstein. I want to lift up these entities because they have dedicated part of their resources to helping support this mission. They understand we're having these conversations to invite the community to have these conversations, not to indict anyone. We will have an opportunity, not for an official Q&A, but if you do have a question, you're welcome to place that in our chat. I'd like to thank these incredible panelists. Each of them I've had the opportunity to interface with at one point or another. And I'm so excited because I frankly want to hear about their journeys because everyone's journey is unique. And to hear another woman's journey often helps uplift me and helps me to understand that I may not have been alone in some of the ways or some of my experiences. We have today Jen Bailey, Executive Director of the Maddox Fund, Danielle Barnes, CEO of Girl Scouts of Middle Tennessee, Sabina Mohyuddin, who is the Executive Director of the American Muslim Advisory Council, and Dr. LaRhonda Magras, who is an alumni of the YWCA world in two different places, Executive Director of the Tennessee Food and Food Bank Association. Each of you are trailblazers and leaders. I recently had a conversation with a really at the top of her game executive, and I talked to her and said what a role model she was for other women, and she was taken aback because she didn't even see herself as a role model, and she's actually president of a corporation. She just thought she just kept putting one step in front of the other and didn't think in terms of her being viewed as a leader and as a mentor and a role model for others. So it's very important for you to embrace that and see that because each of you truly are. I want to often think about the importance that the role that women play in leadership, and all women play these roles. And I think it's so important for us to celebrate our own. Today's conversation will include several subjects, including the glass cliff phenomenon. We'll talk about that a little bit later. and interpersonal racism that impacts our leadership experiences. And also, we have this concept of the American dream narrative, and it often fails to recognize additional barriers that may exist for women of color to overcome. I always say that in my own personal experience, because I've had to work very hard, that my biggest takeaway is that sometimes you're not given the benefit of the doubt. And that sounds sort of straightforward. It's just that when you're constantly in that minefield where if you make a mistake, somehow it's attributed to you being a woman and or a woman of color, not having the benefit of the doubt is in and of itself a barrier. So my hope for today's conversation, we'll have a deeper understanding about the systemic barriers that women of color face and a renewed commitment to dismantling and supporting each other, and maybe sitting back when you're in a situation and not having it first come to mind, well, she's not able to do this, and placing that blame not on the circumstances, but on the individual and her being a woman and or a woman of color. So I'll start off and ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start off with Dr. Magras.
Hello, and I am so honored to be here with all of you and to learn and grow from you. I am the executive director of the Tennessee Food Bank Association, and I wanted to start, if I could, with this quote that I saw today in Leadership First. And it says, "True success is not just about achieving personal goals, but it's also about making a meaningful and positive impact on the lives of others." That is kind of my philosophy. This human rights work is a part of my personal value. It's who I am to my core. And I have enjoyed working for and on behalf of communities that are under-resourced or marginalized communities my entire career. It's hard work and it's rewarding work. And so I am just thrilled to be here. I'm born and raised on the south side of Chicago. If you're from Chicago, you can't just say Chicago. You have to say where in Chicago. So the south side of Chicago, and sort of started this work out as a certified prevention specialist, teaching parenting classes. At the time, I had a 1 and 5-year-old, and I was teaching parenting classes for people who had teenagers. And so, what did I know? But it was so much fun. And I just fell in love with this work. I worked with young people, with youth, teaching parenting classes in schools and drug prevention classes. And I just fell in love with this work and knew this is where the direction that I wanted to go in for my life.
All right, Jen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Bailey, and I often introduce myself this way. I am Jen, daughter of Christine, daughter of Harriet, daughter of Helen, daughter of Carrie, daughter of Sally. When I think about the leadership and the grounding that I have, I know that I come from a long line of Black women, matrilineal wisdom keepers who may not have been valued in their own ways and in their own times as leaders, but certainly within our family system, within their communities, we're the ones who are really grounding the work. They may not have called it leadership, right? But I think about my grandmother who up until her 80s was lobbying for her union in the state of Illinois. So I have some roots in the South Side as well. When I think about some of the barriers that my mother faced as the first integrated class in her high school in Cairo, Illinois, I think about leadership as being what it means to show up and be present in community and offer your gifts into that community. And so I come to this work as now the I started February 3rd, director of the Dan and Margaret Maddox Fund here in Nashville. And our work really sits at the nexus of really imagining a world free from threats of oppression and threat through the lens of youth and the environment. But prior to that work, I came to this work vis-a-vis a nonprofit that I founded. So for 10 years, I led an organization called Faith Matters Network, which is a national nonprofit organization grounded in the womanist or Black feminist tradition, focused on healing and capacity and care building for those leaders in nonprofits and social justice causes who are on the front lines of social change. So I'm really delighted to be in the company of so many powerful women today. I'm just sort of in awe because everyone's reputation precedes them. And so just happy to be in the conversation in that number today.
All right, Danielle.
Well, good afternoon. Danielle Barnes, CEO and President of Girl Scouts of Middle Tennessee. And Jen, I've got to steal that. I love setting yourself up as the daughter. I will tell you my story. My grandmother was a little different though, but largely impactful in this way. She was the woman who wore pearls and heels every day of her life, despite the fact that she was working on a farm. And so what we learned from her is grace and how to maintain grace and dignity through all circumstances. But my journey is a little different. I am one of those individuals that from the ripe old age of 6, I knew that I wanted to practice law. I had absolutely no idea what that meant. But I knew that they told me I was argumentative. They told me I could talk a lot and could get my way and was very persuasive. And so law it was. I entered into the practice of law and through a series of events, just found myself not wanting to become partner and hopped over to the Department of Human Services to hang out, to figure out what I was going to do next, and fell in love with the mission and the work and just being able to make an impact on an individual's life. When I thought I was going to be there for 4 months, I ended up staying for 16 years and ended up serving as the commissioner for the Department of Human Services, both under Governor Haslam and under Governor Lee. After having kept the lights on way too long, thought that I should go into private practice and earn some money, and found myself right back to the same situation. Don't get me wrong, I was doing private consulting, loved what I was doing, being able to make an impact nationwide, but I started to feel that same departure away from being able to make a difference in people's lives. It's great, you go in, you help people, but the actual being able to see it come to fruition just wasn't happening. And Girl Scouts called, and I knew for me this was a full circle moment of where I am supposed to be at this moment in my life. I have always been an advocate for women and children. And so I'm just, this is a moment where I am able to make a tremendous difference in the lives of our young people.
Right, and you have already, so thank you. Sabina.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for putting this panel together because it's such an important conversation. Again, my name is Sabina Mohyuddin. I'm the Executive Director of the American Muslim Advisory Council that serves the Muslim community across Tennessee. I myself, I was born and raised in Nashville, which, you know, is a rare thing to see. But my parents are originally from Bangladesh, and then growing up in the 70s and 80s, we had a very small Muslim community. And I grew up seeing my parents establishing the Muslim community. My father was heavily involved in establishing the Islamic Center of Nashville. And then my mom was always the one who was welcoming new community members, inviting them to their house, and everyone knew her. And I grew up watching them and learning from them. And my mom was someone who wore a sari every day of her life and got her PhD in a sari. So, you know, when Danielle, you're talking about your grandmother, you know, it resonated, and just watching that and knowing that, being proud of your identity and being able to go in the community where people don't understand who you are, where you come from, and your life story, it was very powerful. And so, you know, for myself, I was always, you know, I lived in different cities in Tennessee, but always involved with the Muslim community. And, you know, as somebody just doing what needed to be done. So seeing there's a gap, okay, what can I do? How can I speak out? How can I use my voice? Not thinking of it as stepping into any leadership position, but doing what you need to do at that moment because of your love for your community. And that brought me to when there in 2011 there was an anti-Sharia bill, and in the state legislature, and I was living in Tullahoma, Tennessee, and it was my legislator representative who was sponsoring it, and just like, okay, I got to push back, and working with others, and pushing back, and then realizing that, this is what I love doing. And this is like giving back to the community with the skill sets that I had. And it's just kind of, it wasn't what I ever thought I'd be doing in my life, but it ended up. And I just love that ability to work for our community.
All right, thank you. There's a concept, and really there are nuances to this concept, the glass cliff phenomenon. And sometimes the version of it, the straight up version, is that sometimes women of color or people of color in general are put in leadership positions when there's a crisis or a time of instability, sort of to fix it. But sometimes it, I think, morphs into a concept of, okay, even if the organization is stable, the expectation is you will do something greater or make it grow or do something different or, enhance what it's doing, because the status quo does not become enough for you. You have to do more than that. I'll go to you, LaRhonda. Let's talk about this, the expectations of you in the leadership role.
Boy, this one hit home for me. The glass cliff. And you're right. I think it's not always that there's a bad situation that you're walking into, but there is this expectation that you produce at a higher rate, that you don't make mistakes, or that you are expected to be exceptional. And I think the stress, the stress that has on your body, sometimes on your mental and physical health, is real. And so I've experienced that firsthand. And I do think that, we seem to rise to the occasion. I mean, I think, we do it in spite of, but there is something that suffers, and that because I don't think that you can just continue to just keep pushing forward and never taking the time to do some radical self-care or some really taking care of yourself. So yeah, I think this one did really hit home for me.
All right, Jen, any experience?
Well, I will say I have personal experience, but I also think one of the things, at least has been true in my lineage, is this sort of image of the strong Black woman that as an African-American woman, sort of the expectation is you sort of carry the weight of the community on your back, that you don't complain, you go around, right? At the same time as you are strong, you are told you are supposed to be all about Black girl magic and create a way out of no way, right? And that these are layers, and I'm sure there are analogs in other communities, layers of pressure, even internally, that get sort of foisted upon one's image of what it is to be a quote unquote successful woman or successful leader. And so in addition to sort of the pressures of the outside world, and sort of those expectations then get translated into the workplace, I think there is work for us, I think, sometimes to do around unpacking some of the ways in which those images have led to our own lack of care for ourselves and community, right? Like the number of Black women I know who died early deaths due to stress-related diseases because they didn't take care of themselves because they were caring for everyone else is just the story of my community. And so I say all that to say, I think in addition to the glass cliff of the workplace, I think there's a particular layer of pressure that leaders of color and women, leaders of color under from their own community, to always have an image or portray an image of strength. And part of my hope is that through my vocational life and identity, to help demystify that, right? I think one of the things that is true for me, particularly as I've transitioned to this new role, is recalibrating folks' expectations of what it means to have a Black woman in leadership in this role. I'm not here to save anybody, but I am here to work in partnership with our community to make it better. I am setting boundaries for my time, right, as part of that process. And that's not for anything. I have a 20-month-old and a 4.5-year-old who demand my time in a very particular way in the season. And who are my real bosses, right? And so who have a different set of expectations for me. And so I've been really fortunate here at the Maddox Fund to have a supportive board who has done their work in preparation for welcoming a leader of color into this role. But I know from personal experience that is not always the case. And so I guess if I could lift up 2 themes from my reflection, it's one, what does it mean for us to be held to these sort of impossible standards of what it is to be a woman of color in leadership, to hold that pressure both internally within our own community and externally in the workplace? And what are the ways in which we can begin to trouble or disrupt those norms so that we can be seen for who we are, which are full humans with all of our flaws and all of our imperfections, but also all of our gifts and talents.
Wow, okay, very profound, Danielle.
Well, I will also say this one really hit me, and I love your framing, Sharon, because I had both of these situations. I was fortunate enough, I'll start with Girl Scouts, to say I came into an organization who was previously led by a very strong Black woman who led a very successful organization. No problem, right? You walk in, the organization's on fire, but the expectation, Sharon, is to take it to the next level, make it even something different. And I'm going to tell you both of these pieces. My perspective is a little different in that there's almost this constant perception that my predecessor didn't do or didn't say or did something right. And it's almost as if the people that when I'm in this position, it's almost as if they are baiting me into saying something bad or having a negative opinion about my predecessor.
Yes.
I have to tell you, she's a phenomenal woman. That's the only thing that you're ever going to hear me say. When I leave, people will question the decisions that I make, and they'll question my culture. They'll question my methods. I don't care, right? I'm a different leader. I'm a very different leader than my predecessor, and I will never, ever try to discredit the work that she did. My job is to build upon it. And so I would say my experience in that regard has been this constant pressure of trying to discredit the person, the Black woman before me. And I refuse to do that. And I say that because it's happened twice. So when I took over at the state, my predecessor in that instance was also a Black woman.
Wow.
A very different kind of Black woman who, I don't remember who said this, because I think it might have been Dr. Magras. She was perceived as an angry Black woman. And so again, that constant baiting of, tell me something bad or publicly speak bad about your predecessor. It was a very public position. There was a lot of public heat. Not everything she did, I agreed with. Not everything she did, I would say that the legislature agreed with. And so for me, the biggest challenge was to be in legislative committees, to be before different media presence, and for them to say, well, this is wrong with your department, or this project is wrong, and don't you blame your predecessor? And my response is, well, no. For years, I'm not going to blame there. And so that's twice, I will say, in two very different environments where I have replaced a woman of color. And then for me, it's almost as if I'm being a pawn of crucifying another Black woman. And that's just not something I'm ever going to do. So I think my perspective is a little different on that.
Okay, very good, very profound, but I get that all day, and it's very true, because I think that there's an attempt to validate, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, discriminatory behavior by getting a Black face on it. And that's something. So that was very, very good. Sabina.
So, thinking about how I got into the position and in the work with AMAC, I mean, it was after a crisis moment, the anti-Sharia bill. And when you're doing the work and when there is a crisis, there are much more deliverables that you're showing, right? Community sees the work, but a lot of the work we do is behind the scenes. And but as a woman leading it, oftentimes people think of it as almost a volunteer position and don't, I think, honor the expertise that it takes to do this work. And, you're always having to prove that, you have the expertise to do it. But just the fact that it just can't be done by anyone, you have to have those skill sets to do it. But because it's a lot of behind the scenes work. It's not honored in the same way. And and I know it's been said before, and you said it, Sharon, but in the work you're doing, the moment you make a mistake, you're not given any grace, but it is seen as incompetence. And if, of course, if you're a white male, you would be given that grace, but you, as a woman of color, you're not. And it can be frustrating. It is a time when you need support, and when you don't get it, it's navigating those challenges on your own.
Yeah. And I will say this is that you'll find yourself in many spaces. And I really love all that the panelists have said, because it's up to women like the women on this panel and women that are listening to this conversation to be supportive and be aware, because you will be in seats, and I'm in them a lot, where I hear people taking issues with decisions that are made by women in leadership. And I always step into that space because I ask the question, because there's always an undertone of, do you think that she's the best person in that position, given what just occurred, and not taking into account the headwinds? Because I've heard every excuse for, I think, men, so to speak, not meeting, for instance, their sales numbers. Well, they had a headwind, and oh, well, this happened, that happened, and all these excuses. And I started thinking, I typically don't hear those kinds of conversations when it comes to female leadership, but the same things can happen to anyone. Let's go into this American dream. And I love this whole concept because people really get into what it means to be part of the American family, and you're working hard, you're getting educated. And I've always been the kind of person, I was reading and smart and getting educated and, working as extra hard. And I always knew in my heart that I had to do more to just get what others got for just showing up, so to speak. But let's go into that, this idea of the difficulties that take place when you're in a leadership role, and the expectations of you working harder, faster, smarter, just to stay in the game, so to speak. LaRhonda, talk about a situation maybe that you've experienced where you were, having to work harder just to stay in the race.
This is so interesting to me. I remember I had a supervisor, this is a white female, and boy, she did everything, I think, to undermine my leadership. And I remember saying to her one day, I said, you know what, I'm used to working. I had it by this time. And I said, I'm used to working twice as hard to get half as much. And I guess there was some part of me that thought maybe she didn't really know what that meant, but she did. And so she knew exactly what that meant. And she would call my staff if she wanted to find out something. She would just go all around me, and I would just keep trying to prove myself, keep trying to prove myself. And it's so funny now, if I see her on the street now, I think she'll come and just give me a big, like a big hug. I mean, but we had to get through it. I have sort of a quiet kind of, I didn't want to rock any boats, kind of a quiet demeanor, and I've had it. And I certainly let her have it. So it is tough. It is tough. The expectations are, you're always under scrutiny, I feel. And to the point where you think you're going crazy. Like, did I, I made that decision. I have the authority to make that decision. But it's not the decision that maybe, your supervisor or your board or whomever would have wanted you to make. And so it is a very, it's tough being a woman of color in this spot. So unrealistic expectations sometimes.
Yeah. I'm going to go to you, Jen, a little bit different question because, and in your particular situation, in the nonprofit space, and especially in the foundation space, often you're the only person of color in the room or the only person of color that's in your role. How do you balance staying authentic to yourself? Because, you're going to be a Black woman showing up with the predominantly white or male-dominated spaces.
Thank you for that question. Let me say I'm still, like I mentioned, relatively new to the role. And so I think for me, well, so for me, what it means to show up authentically is to remember that lineage that I shared with you as I introduced myself, that whenever I walk into a room, I'm carrying not just myself, but I'm carrying the communities that we serve at the Maddox Fund, and also the lineage of the women in my family who came before me. And so I think part of that work for me is about in this time being in a posture of listening and figuring out as I navigate this new environment how to speak in a way that I can be heard, right? Because we know in our communities that sometimes the role of what we call code switching is very important, right? That you have to be multilingual, even if you're still speaking English, if that makes sense, right? In different contexts, to be able to be received and heard in a way that people can understand where you're coming from, while also giving space for the communities that you represent at the table. Also, it's a new environment for me. So the organization and nonprofit that I founded and led for 10 years, our staff was 90% women of color. So I feel like I kind of created a bubble for myself over the past 10 years of being surrounded by other women of color and setting a table for a multi-generational context in our staff for us to learn from one another, which had its own challenges, but certainly was a gift to me. And I think one of the things that did for my leadership was reaffirm within me my own gifts and talents and skills. Because sometimes you need to be surrounded by people who can reflect you back to you and remind you of who you are. So as I enter into this new role in philanthropy, I think I'm walking in with a certain degree of confidence in who I am as a leader in the communities that I represent and the people that I'm bringing with me. And I think that helps me not get lost in the sauce, as they say, as I'm attempting to learn and navigate this new environment.
Okay. And Danielle, I hope you'll get into this, but I'll give you the opportunity to, because when you are a woman of color in organizations that, despite what people think about your organizations, because I'm sort of in that situation, despite our mission statement that these organizations have largely been white-led organizations in this city, the multitude of the people that are really part of your community tend to be white. But with that said, there are things that you brought to the table that I know are there because of the sensitivity and knowledge you have of marginalized communities, being sensitive to the fact that there are Black girls like myself that were Girl Scouts, and that's part of my heart, being a Girl Scout. So talk a little bit about you're in this space. A lot of the your people that really support you, and I love their support every day, are predominantly white. Tell me a little bit about your experience of navigating and making sure you stay true to yourself and your communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for that tee up, Sharon. I would say for us, it's been a big shift in perspective. what you're absolutely right. Girl Scouts is absolutely being seen or has traditionally been seen as a very traditional organization that was only available to rich white girls. And that is despite the fact that you were a Girl Scout, despite the fact that I was a Girl Scout, despite the fact that my grandmother was the troop leader for my aunt. We know that that narrative isn't true. A big part of what I think is always incumbent upon us, and I'm going to use it in a much broader context. I think that people lead, and I think, Jen, you were getting to this thought, but people, especially women of color, have to lead from an authentic space. You have to lead from, I am never going to be, despite the fact that, you know, my family thinks differently, I am not a stand on the soapbox, bang your chest, yell as loud as you can with a bullhorn. I support those people. I am grateful that those people are there because they have a role in changing our system. I, however, have figured out my authentic self has been to make change on the inside, to make change in policy, to continue to push things in ways that can't be done by holding a bullhorn. And so I think that there are places for whoever you are, for whatever that kind of leadership style that you have, and really leaning into that. And so even thinking about that from the lens of Girl Scouts, we've almost doubled the number of our outreach girls. And that's because we have said Girl Scouts really should go to girls. And so our outreach program is really those girls who wouldn't normally have access. They're in Title I schools, they're in metro housing developments, they're with public parks, they are inside of some of our charter schools, and some of our housing shelters even. And what we have said is, if these young ladies could just have a moment in time, and this is why it's so critical, and even as a Black woman leader, the same thing, where you strip off just all of those identifiers. You strip off what it's like to be from a community. You strip off what it's like to be a Black woman. You strip off what it's like, even for a minute, Jen, you take off who your mother and your sister, you must not have come from the kind of community I came from, but I had to take away my mom and my sister and my aunt. And at the core, you can develop who you are as a leader, as a person, as an individual. And then when those things begin to pile back on you, because they do pile back on you, you become a Black woman again, you become a member of whatever school you attend, you become a member of your community, and you know who you are at your core, you know how you can lead at your core, and that's how you make that true impact. So understanding that, and understanding that every girl, no matter where they come from, deserves that kind of opportunity, has been absolutely something that I've been grateful that I've been able to really amplify.
Love that, love that. And Sabina, going back to you and something that you said earlier, and I have seen this in so many cases, when you have a woman in a role that is really newly defined, that there can be a devaluation of that role because a woman's sitting there. And that goes to, you know, this whole issue of how do you stay in that authenticity of you being a female or being a woman of color, but yet standing up and saying this role deserves a level of dignity and expertise.
Great question. It's not easy, and again, it's always trying to prove the work, prove the expertise that is required to get the work done, and that as a woman of color, that I can open those doors and get things done. And I've seen it where a male walks in, and just by default, because they're a male, their perception is whatever work they've done is excellent, and it gets more praise. And so it is a lot of talking, and communities are different, but working within my own community, changing that perception, and then kind of always being seen as sometimes a thorn in the side because I will champion, as a woman of color, champion women's issues when I see when their needs are not being met. But then that can be seen as I'm being aggressive. But these are issues that are in the community and need to be brought up. And so how do you navigate that that landscape with community members? And it's you know, it is difficult. I think people are changing. People are seeing the work that's being done, and I have to say that there, at the same time, there are a lot of community members who are keep telling me that it's amazing. AMAC is a woman-led organization, and the work that we do, and are totally supportive. I mean, our board is amazing, supportive, and there are community members who say it. And so sometimes it's not letting the naysayers bring you down, because that can easily happen, and your focus can go in that direction. And you've got to realize that you can't spend all your time responding to what is not a legitimate concern, and really focusing on people who get it, and building on that.
Okay. All right. We always like to have as part of these conversations what each individual would say that they would tell either their younger self or another woman who aspires to be leaders, because you're all leadership. And I said I was talking to this really at the top of her game leader, and she just didn't see herself. And I think this is probably how women are taught as a leader. She is here, the leader, role model. I said, look, you got president of a company. How could you not see yourself? But she just did not. And she was honest about it. She just did not understand how she got there. But surely you can give us some words of encouragement. How did you get from A to B? LaRhonda, you've headed up many organizations. How did you get to this point? What advice would you give to someone else that says, I want to be in that seat?
Go get it. I think despite despite the challenges, it may seem like it's out of reach, but it won't come to you necessarily. You have to go and get it. So that's some advice there. I wish someone had told me to get a coach, to get a mentor, and to get a to really get, I mean, sponsors are, and we'll talk about sponsors, I'm sure, later, but a therapist. I will be very honest with you, because I think you really do have, there's a lot of weight. I think we talked about that a little bit ago, that's on your shoulders. And I think you can be very successful in this work by, being authentic, staying true to yourself. And I know that can be, maybe feel like it's not safe for a lot of people. Not everyone can just leave their job because they don't like it or the organization. You have to learn how to work within it. And that means a lot of times you need to feel like you're safe. But a coach is someone that can really help you talk through a lot of the challenges that you may be facing. And I think that is a very, at least for me, I wish I had that and I wouldn't have had a whole lot of trial and error. But that did create a stronger leader in me. It also made me a leader who is, I'm always reaching back. And so as I climb, I make sure that hand is back and I am pulling someone else up, because I believe in having a deep bench. And I just love leadership development and helping to shape the next generation of leaders. So go get it.
All right, Jen, what would be your advice either to your younger self or to another person? Let's say my aspiration is to lead a foundation, what would you tell them?
Well, if I had to talk to myself in my, college years, I would give this piece of advice. And y'all have to forgive me. I am a clergy woman by training in the AME church, so I'm always ripe with a metaphor. But when I was growing up, I'm pretty tall. I grew up really fast, right? And I think that was a metaphor for me of like my own ambition as a young person. I thought I had to join the right clubs and do the right things and pursue this fellowship and this fellowship. And what used to happen to me and still happens sometimes is that my knee would pop out of socket because of how quickly I grew and my ligaments just didn't fuse quite right. And so I thought a lot in my life about what it meant to grow fast and long in my career, in my life, and physically. And so if I had to talk to my, 21-year-old Jen that was on 5 different committees at Tufts University, who was like applying for every fellowship and trying to do everything, I would say it's okay to grow deep and wide, meaning that there will be times in your life that are accelerated, right? Where you need to take advantage of the opportunities in front of you. But if you don't have a firm foundation in community of people, of family, of friends, the people who are going to reflect you back to you at different points in your life when you get lost in the pursuit of a particular ambition in your life, that is what leads to burnout. That is what leads to exhaustion. That is what leads to not really being able to hold it together. And so if I had to talk to myself, knowing who that ambitious 20-year-old who was trying to do all the things was and move way too fast, I would say it's okay sometimes to pause. And as my grandma Harriet used to say, go sit your butt down someplace, right? From time to time. Just go sit. She would always look at me like, wait, just go sit down. And if there's a balance, it doesn't mean that that's not an invitation to be stagnant by any means, but for those who are on a career trajectory or vocational trajectory that is about pursuing a higher calling and purpose, having those moments to pause within yourself and giving yourself the grace for that, because we know all too well as women of color, people will try to dictate your time for you. If you're not careful. So that would be the advice that I would give to little college student Jen, who was doing the most.
Danielle, little Danielle's looking at you and say, help me, give me some advice.
Little Danielle, I would look at and I would say 3 words. I would say you are enough. And we don't say that to ourselves enough. We just as women, as individuals, as members of society, we're never thin enough. We're never pretty enough. Our hair is never straight enough. We're never smart enough. We're never right. We're never rich enough. Like all of these things that we continue to put on our own shoulders, we're limiting ourselves. And so I would have looked at little Danielle and said, stop trying so hard because you are enough. And I say, so that's where I sit when I talk to leaders. When I look at leaders, I'm going to answer the second part of your question. When I talk to young leaders, I would tell them to stay focused on the work that they are doing. I have found young leaders so often looking up and trying to figure out what that next step is, that they've often forgotten to focus on the work that they're doing. And to give themselves the grace. That's the last one I'll say, is just give yourself grace. Jen, I pray that you don't come to the same realization that I had to as a parent. And I'll share this story because I suspect everyone on this panel, probably everybody listening, if you haven't, you will experience this. It's called mommy guilt, and it is very real. And I will tell you, the minute that I decided to leave state government was not because I was in the newspaper every day for 4 months. It was not because we had a tornado that wrecked a building. It was not because of COVID-19. It was because on my birthday, my then 8-year-old daughter gave me a letter that said mommy. And of course, if you can imagine 8-year-old handwriting, it's backwards and it's upside down and it's spelled wrong. I know your job is really stressful And I know that it takes you away from home a lot. And I know you're only doing it because or she said something like, you're doing it to change the world, and I love you. And I don't ever want anyone change the world. You absolutely change the world. You can change the world. But there's two things that I know that will never change. Nobody will ever remember that I was commissioner. But I have two kids in my life who will remember if I ever missed a game. And so give yourself that grace while you continue to perform.
Oh. All right, Sabina. And I say this because I know all the women in this panel, all of us are mothers, and we can feel that. Of course, you have mother's guilt. I'm on the grandmama guilt now. So it goes to the next level. Go ahead.
Don't tell me that. It's supposed to be over.
It continues. It continues.
No,
and
it continues,
amplifies.
Danielle. That's what I'm told.
It continues now.
I mean, everything that's been said is so powerful. I mean, I think is know who you are before you start this journey. And it's hard when you're young. You're still trying to figure out who you are, but there's a core person within you that you've got to know who you are and develop it. Be confident in who you are. I mean, you can't let every whisper about you from other people affect you. You have to know who you are and have confidence in who you are. Now, it's like you shouldn't have confidence when you don't have a skill set. I mean, you should back it with the skills you need. I think when I was at Vanderbilt, I got a degree in mechanical engineering. So I wasn't in a nonprofit world. I wasn't doing this work. But when we founded AMAC, I learned everything I could learn. I was like doing whatever I needed to do, studying, learning by trial and error how to do things. So I had the skill sets. I can feel that confidence in the work I was doing. And so, back that confidence with acquiring the skill sets that you need. But you have to have mentors. And for me, and I have to mention it, like my brother, Rashid Fakhruddin, who was an incredible mentor to me, opening doors for me before we started AMAC to do some of the things I wanted to do in the community. And then Zulfat Suera, always like believing in me before I even realized, that, I could do this work, but then also standing by my side to help me and guide me. And then Kasar Abdullah, and there are many others. But those mentors are key, to also building your confidence, acquiring the skill set, and being able to vent when you need to vent, because the microaggressions you'll face are real, and you need a place to release that and know how to react to it. In the work that I do, we are always trying to find those young leaders and mentor them and help them acquire those skill sets they need, because we see the potential in them. And so it's you always, as you're going on your journey, you always have to give back in your community.
And I'm going to do a little bit of self-confession, because I've known Sabina's family, her father, her brothers, both of them. I know her family. And for a long time, I've always thought of her as the daughter of or sister of. And I came to the realization, it was really a couple of years ago, and I thought, wait a minute. She is a fully grown, very accomplished person of her own. So you're no longer you're just your father's daughter or your sisters, or have very accomplished brothers, but you're a woman of achievement of your own. And I was glad I came to that realization because it is phenomenal. So we're not just going to say that's Sharon's sister. No, you and Sabina, you're on your own. You're good. And you're enough. So that I'm very, very excited. I'm excited for you, excited for this panel. Now, very quickly, we always give each panelist the opportunity to give one last piece of advice, whether that's to the communities or something that someone should do, or if you had a magic wand and you could change something about this community to help support you in your leadership journey, what would that be? And I'll start with you, LaRhonda.
In my own leadership journey?
Yes, what could we do as a community? We try to leave each individual with wisdom because there are people that will come to us afterwards and say, well, what can we do to be supportive of these leaders? What could you change in your behavior? For instance, I talked about changing my personal view of Sabina, which, was important because you need to see people in their empowered state and need to understand that.
I think it's important to be great listeners. And that is a lot of times I know I want to jump in. I want to sometimes go straight to solution. But to be a great listener, and I think of me as a leader, and younger leaders, I think of, sponsor someone. I think it's important to open doors. To be visible is currency. And so if you have a position of authority, open doors for another leader that may, those are very, it's critical. I think we take it for granted. I think that there are folks out there who have a lot of things that they can offer us, but they don't know that we may need that particular skill or to skill up and or to have that door opened for us.
Dan.
I think this kind of picks up on my colleagues' comments, but always be in a posture that is willing to be transformed, right? That there's always something for us to learn and always something for us to teach others. And that is through the relationships that we have with one another that we begin to realize more fully who we're called to be in our leadership journey. I like to say I like to learn both from the senior saints and the playground prophets, right? When I think about my work in the world, that there's as much that I am learning in this moment as a leader from my 20-month-old daughter, who is fierce and unapologetic. In a time when I can find myself being timid. She gonna tell you what she want when she need it and when to do what she needs done. And there's a lesson in that. So always be in a posture that is willing to be transformed by the world around you.
Danielle.
I love that. You wait till she's 14.
You wait till she's 34. You'll learn something then.
I'll say this. We are very fortunate as a community. And I find myself now on the other end of being able to give more, in that Nashville is welcoming, and that if you ask any individual for a cup of coffee, they will 9 times out of 10 meet you for a cup of coffee. I've had more coffee in the last 3 years than I think that my body can probably digest. But what has happened is those conversations set up relationships. I think this really kind of piggybacks on both of what my colleagues have said here today. It's mentorship, it's community, it's, I will share this, Sharon, if it's okay with you. Sharon was one of the first people I called when I came to Girl Scouts, and I was like, how do you do this? I was like, how do we go into this nonprofit world? And everyone will give you their perspective, hear a different piece of advice. And if you continue to rely on those people, you will hopefully find yourself that you never become the emperor without clothes, because you develop such relationships that I would hope that at any moment, Sharon, and I already know this, she'll pull me aside and be like, you know what, you may want to look at it this way.
You know me.
And it's not from a place of discredit. It's from a place of wanting you to succeed. So I would say, as a community, continue to create that environment, continue to have that cup of coffee, and continue that group cultivation.
Sabina?
So the way you can support, women leaders of color, I think uplifting the work that they do and being ready to speak out and defend or speak out in support of those women of color leaders in a time of crisis, when like the silence of your allies or friends during crisis really can burn. And so when you get those messages of support and people being able to publicly support you in those times, it is amazing and is greatly needed.
And I will say this, each of you was chosen not by chance. You are actually here because we felt very strongly that your voices need to be heard. And I will say this, and I'll make this personal commitment. When somebody messes with one of you, they're messing with me. And everyone that knows me, I will stand through the fire with you. I said, that's simply not right. And some people have misbehaved towards some people on this panel, and there's no way in this world I could go home and put my head on a pillow without calling them out. So I do have people's back, and I do think that to the extent that I do have a position of any power whatsoever in this community, that I stand strongly with each one of you. And if you need me to go to that person on your board or someone around you that has mistreated you or done something wrong, I don't mind calling people out and say, look, this is not acceptable behavior. It just simply is not acceptable, because everyone deserves a level of dignity and respect. And I do know what it's like to be in difficult circumstances. I'm standing here with my little grandbaby. I have a grandbaby now, so that's a whole different version of myself. And I do not believe in hazing. Just because someone had a hard time doesn't mean this next person has to have a hard time. Hopefully he will have a much easier life than his forefathers had. They had a very difficult place. And I stand strongly with making sure that we all can have a better life and have a better community. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.